We are going to focus on Chapter 1, the science of biology today. So we're going to kick off Unit 1. My notes come from the Pearson Miller and Levine biology textbook. So that is what I am following, though it applies to biology. So the science of biology, scientists have an ongoing goal to explain things in the world. They discover new information about our world all the time, but they can't answer all of the questions. So think about different questions that can be answered in science and questions that cannot be answered in science. Pretty much anything that you can gather evidence for, so anything that can be observed, researched, investigated, or measured, you can find an answer for. But there are some questions that we cannot technically find evidence for. So, for example, what is the purpose of life? That's not something that we can measure or research in science to create a good evidence-based idea or answer. So, the branches of biology are actually very numerous. You have zoologists, which study animals, botanists study plants, paleontologists, biochemists, geneticists, ecologists, microbiologists, physicians, wildlife managers, foresters, agricultural researchers. The opportunities within science seem almost to be endless. There's so many different fields of study. Oh, goodness, I haven't actually made it a PowerPoint yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, you have a few learning objectives from this PowerPoint. Mainly, we need to be able to state the goals of science, describe a little bit of methodology, describe why it's important to use a universal system of measurements. But while we're talking about our goals of science in particular biology here, biology is the study of all life. That is what we are going to be looking at. Science is the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as knowledge generated through this process. You know something when you learn about it or you see it for yourself. And a lot of times this knowledge comes from people who study particular topics. When we say that science is a process, we mean that it's something that people do. It's not just a group of facts. This way of knowing phrase identifies science as a method or a tool used to learn about the natural world. So one of the goals of science is to provide natural and testable explanations for events in our natural world. It also aims to use explanations supported by data to understand what's going on and to make useful predictions about natural events. We don't use the word proves. We are not going to say that science proves anything, because as we continue to gather more evidence, our understanding and our knowledge changes. So our ideas can change as well. Let's come over here to the next slide. So the first part of using the scientific method is observation. You've probably been taught in the past that the scientific method is a set of like 5 or 6 simple steps performed by all scientists, and it's all exactly the same in the same order, and that is wrong. Scientists use these steps that we're going to go over, but it's not always in the same order or in the same way. So this scientific methodology describes a general style of investigation that applies across all branches of science. So this means that scientists carry out investigations in similar ways, but not in identical ways. We begin with observation. So we're going to kind of notice and describe events or processes in a careful, detailed way. For example, an observation between these two pictures. The marsh grass in location A is shorter than the marsh grass in location B. This is going to lead to our question. Here our question is, why do marsh grasses grow to different heights in different places? We're looking at one variable at a time. Different height, so marsh grass height. If we use more than one factor, more than one variable, it makes it impossible to tell if the observed changes are coming from one factor or then another, and we cannot reach an accurate explanation. If a scientist were to study two variables, so for example, the amount of light and the amount of water and how it affects plant growth, we're not going to know if it's the light or the water because you're looking at both things at the same time. So we're going to focus on one variable. Here we're looking at why are they getting taller? So we're going to create a hypothesis next. What could make these plants taller? Could it be temperature, sunlight, water, nutrients? We're going to look at the nutrient nitrogen. Okay? So, create our hypothesis. We are going to make an inference based on our prior knowledge and then generate a hypothesis. We're then going to experiment. So right now, you cannot tell the difference between these two plots of land. We don't know, which is A, which is B. We don't see anything happening yet. However, we are going to change things to determine if our variable is going to make a difference or not. So by this I mean that we are going to create an experimental group and add the nitrogen to the experimental group, and then have a control group where nothing is added. This is just a natural base group, okay? The experimental group, because we are adding something, is our independent variable. Independent variable can also be called the manipulated variable. It means that the scientist has manipulated or changed something in this group, okay? So in this case, we are changing nitrogen. We're adding nitrogen. The change that's going to occur is going to be the height. So how tall does the grass grow in response to that nitrogen or in response to having nothing in the control group? The factor that changes in response to the independent variable, so this is the independent because we changed it, is called the dependent or the responding variable. So in this case, we changed the amount of nitrogen. So the grass height is going to be the dependent variable. It's responding to the change in nitrogen. Other variables that we could have looked at would be like plant density, soil type, amount of water, height above the tide level, but we're focusing here on nitrogen. So next, we are going to collect data. There's two types of data. There is quantitative data, which is measured as numbers, and then qualitative data, which is based off of like descriptions. All right, so here we are measuring the height of the grass because we're using numbers for height. This is quantitative data. An example of qualitative would be something like, is the grass green or did it turn brown? Lastly, we're going to analyze our data. Data analysis in science often relies on the use of statistics. Although some statistical calculations are very sophisticated, calculations like mean, median, mode, those can all be very simple. Other simple analyses that we might look at were things like percent error for experimental data. This graph is showing you that the experimental group, the independent variable where we added extra nitrogen, grew more than the control group. The grasses got taller. So reading graphs and patterns, is also called analyzing data. And based on this analysis, we can make a conclusion for this particular event. Our conclusion here should be that nitrogen caused the grass to grow higher. Once we've made our conclusion, based on this data analysis, we can then go back to our original hypothesis and revise it, or we can do another experiment. Now, if your data matches your hypothesis, then you can say that you accept your hypothesis. But if your data does not match, then you must refute your hypothesis, which means it was not correct, and that's okay. A lot of times scientists make hypotheses and they do their experimenting and collect data and they were totally wrong, and that's okay. It just shows you what direction you need to go in now. This experiment in particular could be repeated with more or less nitrogen or with a different type of nutrient if our hypothesis were refuted. Sometimes, though, these hypothesis-based experiments are not possible. So, for example, some scientists don't have initial information to make a hypothesis based off of, such as like when they're studying animal behavior in the wild. All right, so these qualities are beneficial qualities for scientists. This little map here is showing that the different aspects of science are all interconnected, which makes this process dynamic, flexible, and unpredictable. Because of this, it's important for scientists to have these qualities. So, curiosity helps form questions. Skepticism helps scientists question existing ideas. Creativity can help with things like planning experiments. And then open-mindedness means that you can accept different ideas, and you can accept when you have to refute your hypothesis because it wasn't correct. Ideas in science can arise in many ways, from simple curiosity to the need to actually solve a problem. So scientists will often begin investigations by making observations, asking questions, talking with colleagues, and then reading about experiments that have already been conducted. So some present-day issues that scientists could use prior research for to learn more about would be things like reversing climate change, or cleaning up pollution problems, or how to better deal with things like childhood obesity or other health issues. Technology now is helping. It's playing a huge role, especially as we advance technologically. So it provides new opportunities to ask questions, and we can get different forms of data, and we can get larger groups of data. And these technologies so far have proved to be helpful for scientists to society. The term new ideas is found in the center of this diagram because each of these four processes in the corners lead to new ideas in science. When a scientific paper is published, it does not mean that the research in that topic is complete. It often will open doors for many new studies about the same topic. So let's say that a scientist discovered a certain species of plant, and it uses a chemical signal to signal a species of wasp that will then attack the insects that's eating the leaves of the plants. From this, other questions could form, like, do all plants signal? Do all wasps respond to these signals? Which plants are trying to defend themselves? A major way that scientists communicate and keep information objective is through peer review. Publishing articles in a peer-reviewed science journal allows researchers to share ideas, and it allows other scientists to evaluate their data and analyze it. Any scientist that claims to discover something new has to be willing to reveal all of their data, and they have to be open to scrutiny. Sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes scientists will make things up to just get a paper published or for whatever other reason, and they have to know that other scientists are going to check up after them. and you shouldn't publish false results like that, and that's why we have peer review, so that things like that don't happen. And this leads to a robust bank of knowledge that's very credible. And science also applies to practical problems and everyday issues. So we have these two groups, the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And these are examples of government agencies that apply science to practical problems. The EPA helps develop and enforce regulations that protect the environment. The results of their studies, whether they're carried out in an EPA lab or by other researchers, are used when regulations are developed. And so the FDA applies science to help maintain public health. They are responsible for the safety of cosmetics, medical devices, and other categories of products, like food. Both of these groups, EPA and FDA, provide scientifically accurate information to the public for them to make decisions as well. Science influences society because the data helps provide answers to questions that affect everyday lives. So scientists don't work in a vacuum, or they don't always work, alone, closed up in their own little lab. Scientists collaborate, they work together often, and their research is strongly influenced by society. But society can limit the applications of scientific ideas, especially when the conflict is because of cultural beliefs. So, for example, within the last few years, cigarettes used to be totally okay inside public places. However, data has shown that secondhand smoke was dangerous. So people started to see cigarettes differently, and they didn't want them in the places, they were going to eat with their kids if they weren't smokers. And so states have banned cigarettes from indoors in public places. So like you can't go into a restaurant and smoke anymore. There is a difference between the way that we use the word theory every day and the scientific use of the word theory. Many people perceive scientific theories to be like ideas or hunches, but that's just because of the way that we use theory. So if I say, I have a theory that it might storm tomorrow, it's just an idea. Like I think that it might storm, but we don't really know. In science, the word theory is used entirely differently. It refers to an idea that has been thoroughly tested, and it's supported by a great deal of evidence, like the theory of gravity. Now, we talked about collecting data, and it's important that when you collect data, it is the same everywhere that you go. So most other countries use this system of measurement. They use metric units, or the SI system of measurements. In America, we don't. We use a different system. But in science, they use these common metric units because you want the data that you collect to be easily read by somebody who picks up, your work in Germany or Australia or Mexico or wherever. So we use this metric system. Now, it's very, very important that your measurements in science are accurate, because errors in measurement can decrease the ability for your information to be accurate and reliable. There is this International Bureau of Weights and Measures in France, and they oversee this whole SI system of measurement. They recognize 7 official base units, so meters for length, kilograms for mass, seconds for time, amperes for electrical current, Kelvin for temperature, candelas for luminosity, moles for the amount of a substance. Now, derived units are those that involve more than one base unit. So, for example, force is expressed in newtons. Newtons is a unit derived from meters, kilograms, and seconds. So just like all other aspects of science, things change. They're subject to additions and modifications as we get new technology and as new fields of science emerge. I have added here another way for you to look at this. So sometimes you have to make conversions. This is my favorite chart. Let's say that you are trying to find, you have to convert from like meters to centimeters. So this chart tells you that you have to move 2 places to the right. So every jump is a move in your decimal mark. Let's say you're going from basic to kilos. So you're going from liters to kilometers. You're going to move 1, 2, 3 places to the left. We talked about how it's very important for your measurements to be accurate. So you want the measurements that you take to be in the same unit as those that someone in Australia takes. However, you also want your measurements to be accurate and precise. So accuracy is the closeness of a measured value to a known value. Accurate means that, let's see if I can move me out of the way. Accurate means that it's very close to the actual value. Now, precision is when you have 2 values or more that are very close to each other. So this is precise. They're not accurate, they're not dead on the bullseye, but they're all very close together. If they are both, then they are accurate and precise. So, just a little recap. We talked about the basic goal of biology is knowing. We want to do experiments and collect data and test our hypotheses to learn new things, and scientists are always learning new things. We talked about kind of the general idea of scientific methodology. You create your question and your observations based off of your observations and your hypothesis, and you collect data and you analyze it, and sometimes it doesn't work, and that's okay, and you have to start over, but that's okay. And then we talked a bit about why it is important for your measurements to be accurate and precise and to use the correct unit of measurements so that they are the same across the world, because remember, scientists collaborate so often. That is the end. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.